The Greeks assemble a coalition army to outnumber the Trojans 5-1. They'll need that overwhelming force to ensure a quick, decisive victory. And to deliver that force, Homer says the Greeks sailed to Troy on 1,000 black-bowed ships.
Is there anything we should know from an intelligence point of view?
Well, a couple things I'd like to point out, sir. First, as you know, Troy is a heavily fortified city. It's got a strong and a high wall. If we allow them to get behind that wall, that means we're going to have to lay siege to them. Also, they have a series of potential allies that if we alienate them, could come down on the side of the Trojan.
Well, given that intelligence backdrop, what do you think the operation should look like?
The Greeks should land directly before Troy and either defeat them on the battlefield in open combat with our overwhelming force or starve them out of their walled city.
Overwhelming force delivered directly to the shores of Troy on 1,000 ships. The Greeks are poised to recapture Helen, restore their honor, and gain power and wealth by controlling the most important trade route of the Bronze Age. It's a simple enough plan. One last logistical consideration: how to feed 1,000 ships full of warriors.
What's your thoughts there, logistician?
The Trojans would have gathered all the local food and water that was available and pulled it within the walls of their defenses for their own use and as a means of denying it to the use of the Greeks. The Greek army, therefore, would have to go further and further afield to gather those supplies of food and water that they were going to need to subsist on. And the primary risk there is that they would alienate those local populations that heretofore had not been engaged in the conflict but would now be inclined to come in on the side of the Trojans.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, John, because it looks like the Greeks were divided between what they should do in order to win most easily and what they had to do in order to survive as an army. They had no choice except to support themselves off the land by foraging and by raiding.
And it is precisely the result of one of those raids that starts Homer's Iliad. Agamemnon and Achilles fight over a woman that Achilles captures during a raid. Agamemnon pulls rank and claims Achilles' war prize for himself. Achilles rages, reaches for his sword. Professor of Classics Robert Garland reads from the Iliad.
Someday, I swear, a yearning for Achilles will strike Greece's sons and all your armies. But then, Agamemnon, harried as you will be, nothing you do can save you, not when your hordes of fighters drop and die, cut down by the hands of man-killing Hector. Then you will tear your heart out desperate, raging that you disgraced the best of the Greeks.
Achilles withdraws himself and his troops from battle, and the raids the Greeks conduct drive the neighboring population into an alliance with the Trojans. The Greeks lose their advantage of overwhelming force, and the war drags on for 10 long years with no clear victor.
I think from the point where Homer begins the Iliad, where there is a quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles, his most important warrior, it's clear that this is not altogether a coalition of the willing that he has brought to Troy.
The trouble for this coalition of the unwilling starts 10 years earlier back on mainland Greece, where Agamemnon plots a course of revenge and plunder. There, he will be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice, the ritual murder of his own daughter. Troy, a Bronze Age World Trade Center. Sung about by Homer, his Iliad and Odyssey become the first literary works of Western civilization. But is the mythological city real? Archaeologists now seem certain they have discovered the legendary lost city. But what evidence do we have of the enemies of Troy? The Bronze Age Greeks and Homer's King of Kings, Agamemnon. How does Agamemnon forge a coalition of Greek warlords to wage a war of revenge and plunder? This is the true story of Troy. West of Troy, across the Greek islands dotting the Aegean, lies mainland Greece. Athens, Sparta, Pylos, Olympus, and at their center, the largest and richest of the Bronze Age principalities, Mycenae. Hidden in these ruins is evidence of their wealth and power. Spiros Iacovides is the godfather of Mycenaean archaeology and director of excavations.
I have been working here since '58, which means for 40 odd years. And I have come to love the place. Mycenaean civilization was a time of very active interconnections. People had to come through Mycenae or through the area of Mycenae, wherever they wanted to go.
Just the sight of this fortress sends a message of power to friend and foe alike. The city's walls rise 40 feet high and span 25 feet wide. Today, Christofilis Magidis, assistant director of excavations, approaches the main entrance, a 20-ton stone carving called the Lion Gate, which dates to the time of the Trojan War.
The main element here is the lion relief on top of the gate in the relieving triangle. Here we have an amalgam of political statements and religious allusions.
The column represents the house of the king, and the lions, his power and protectors. It is a massive display of the king's divine right to rule.
It's a very strong statement for the incomer at the first moment he enters the citadel.
Just inside the Lion Gate, here in 1876, Heinrich Schliemann uncovers one of the richest finds in archaeological history, including a magnificent golden death mask. In his showman-like way, he proclaims, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." High atop the citadel, archaeologists uncover remains of a palace much like one described by Homer. Inside, they discover a treasure trove of opulent relics and murals, glorifying Mycenaean war and conquest.
We have scenes, beautiful scenes of a besieged city with tall buildings and women looking out of the windows, warriors, chariots, and horses. One cannot but think that these scenes reflect, or at least echo in some way, all the adventures of the Mycenaeans in Southwest and Northwest Asia Minor.
On the terrace of the palace, overlooking the rich valley and beyond to the Aegean, perhaps dreaming of conquering Troy, kings like Agamemnon would feast with fellow warlords. Homer describes such a feast that takes place across the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Pylos, in the kingdom of wise old King Nestor, another hero of the Trojan War. Here, in 1996, in the basement of a regional museum, archaeologist Sharon Stocker finds boxes of burnt animal bones. Stored there by the famous archaeologist Carl Blagan more than 50 years ago and labeled table scraps. Stocker finds something peculiar about them.
What we have represented here are bones from the thighs and the mandibles of bulls, male cattle, and probably about 10 individuals are represented.
The meat from 10 cattle can feed 6,000 people. And the fact that the remains are specific body parts, and all from male bulls, makes Stocker and archaeologist Jack Davis suspect they have something more than table scraps.
It was here that he found the objects that we've been most interested in.
Yes.
That is, in this corner, more or less, must have been the gigantic heap of animal bones.
Clearly, the bones represent the animals eaten at the feast.
A little bit closer to the wall in here had to be the spearhead.
The spearhead is likely to be the butchering tool.
And then I think off here must have been the pile of little kielikas, the miniature drinking cups.
In Blegen's 1950s excavation, thousands of kielikis were discovered in every corner and corridor of Nestor's palace, representing thousands of guests drinking.
All of these objects were grouped in close proximity here, one to another.
But they also find one more piece of evidence. Written in a primitive script known as Linear B, translated in the 1950s, the tablet reveals another purpose for the feast.
So it's about here that the tablet was found that proves that sacrifices were in the process of being made in honor of the god Poseidon.
Piecing together the evidence, Stocker and Davis paint a clear picture of feasting in the Bronze Age.
Okay, so Sherry, if we were coming here to a feast, this must be where we get our first glimpse of the actual banqueting area.
Then the guests, as Homer says, ate well, and no man's hunger lacked a share of the banquet. The young men brimmed the mixing bowls with wine and poured rounds for all.
And they would have seen the power of the kings displayed there on the walls above them as they were participating in the feast, as a kind of reminder of what the Mycenaeans were capable of doing.
Yes.
By providing this feast and sacrifice, the king presents himself as the messenger to the gods, and his call to war as divine destiny. Surely the feast in this setting is a persuasive weapon for a king luring warriors to join him in a battle against the Trojans. But as a final appeasement to the gods, King Agamemnon must make the ultimate sacrifice: the ritual murder of his own daughter. Helen, Queen of Sparta, is abducted by Paris, Prince of Troy. A personal attack on family honor escalates to an international crisis. With enticements of wealth and power, King Agamemnon forges an unwilling coalition of Mycenaean Greek warlords to do battle with the Trojans. But now, the gods and his warriors demand from him the ultimate sacrifice: the ritual murder of his own daughter. This is the true story of Troy. At perhaps the most disturbing intersection of mythology and history lies the practice of human sacrifice. How can an act considered the ultimate sacrilege in the modern world be so prevalent to the ancients? Classics professor Robert Garland on a beach not unlike that of Troy.
Human sacrifice is committed by Agamemnon. Achilles, we are told, slaughters 12 Trojan youths to appease the spirit of his friend Patroclus. And at the end of the war, Polyxena is sacrificed at the grave of Achilles.
Although these incidents of human sacrifice exist in the mythological realm, there is also historical evidence of human sacrifice. From Egypt to Babylon, slave and prisoner sacrifice is widespread during the Bronze Age, often used as a public display of the king's power. But could the Greeks, founders of Western civilization, also have practiced human sacrifice?
There seems to be some archaeological record of human sacrifice. I'm just going to mention certain chamber tombs here in the area of Mycenae. where we have found